The dust hadn't settled in Jerome Junction, Arizona for 3 days straight, and Tessa Whitmore thought she might die right there on the wooden walkway outside the general store, with her stomach eating itself from the inside out. It was late June of 1883, and the copper mining town clung to Cleopatra Hill like a stubborn dream refusing to wake, baking under a sun that showed no mercy to anyone foolish enough to stand still too long. She had been standing still for hours. The scrap of bread in her hand was rock hard, probably dropped by someone leaving the mercantile 2 days ago, and she had found it wedged between the boards when her knees finally buckled from weakness. Tessa had been rationing nothing for so long that even this pathetic find felt like answered prayer. Her fingers trembled as she raised it to her lips, tasting dust and desperation, when she heard the crying. A child's crying, the kind that comes from deep in the belly where hunger lives like a wild animal. Tessa turned her head slowly, conserving energy, and saw them huddled in the narrow gap between the general store and the saloon. A woman, hollow-eyed and gaunt, clutching 2 small children to her sides. Mexican, by the look of them, probably workers from one of the mines that had closed suddenly when the vein ran out. Jerome Junction had dozens of such families now, left behind when the money moved on to richer hills. The reasonable thing, the survival thing, would have been to eat the bread and pretend she hadn't seen them. Tessa's feet moved before her mind finished arguing. "Here," she said, kneeling down carefully because standing back up would be its own challenge. She held out the bread to the mother, who stared at her with such naked suspicion that Tessa almost laughed. Almost. For the little ones. The woman's eyes darted from the bread to Tessa's face, searching for the trick, the trap, the inevitable demand for payment of some kind. But Tessa just waited, arm extended, until the woman's hand shot out quick as a snake and snatched the offering. The children fell on it like wolves, and Tessa pushed herself upright through sheer stubbornness, turning away before she could watch them eat what should have been her salvation. She made it exactly 6 steps before her vision started going gray at the edges. The world tilted sideways, and she grabbed for the hitching post, missing it entirely. Strong hands caught her before she hit the dirt, and she found herself staring up at the underside of a jaw covered in 3 days of dark stubble. The face that looked down at her was weathered brown from sun and wind, with eyes the color of creek water in spring, pale green-gray and startlingly clear. "Easy there," the man said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle for someone built like he fought mountains for entertainment. "When's the last time you ate something?" "I'm fine," Tessa said automatically, because admitting weakness to strange men in Arizona mining towns was how women ended up in situations worse than starvation. She tried to pull away, but her legs had apparently decided they were done participating in her survival. "You just gave away what looked like your only food to that family," the man said, not letting go but not holding tight either, just keeping her upright with an ease that suggested he had hauled heavier things than half-dead women before. "Saw the whole thing from across the street." Tessa's face burned despite the heat she was already dying from. They needed it more. "Noble," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, which surprised her. "Also stupid. You can't help anybody if you're dead." "Then I will die with a clean conscience," Tessa snapped, finding some reserve of energy in her indignation. "Now if you would kindly release me, I have places to be." "Where?" he asked simply. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That is none of your concern, Mr. Kellan Prescott," he supplied. "And it became my concern when I had to keep you from cracking your head open on the street. Come on." Before she could protest, he was walking her toward the hotel restaurant, one hand firm on her elbow, moving slow enough that she could keep her feet under her but fast enough that stopping seemed harder than continuing. Tessa tried to dig in her heels anyway. "I cannot afford restaurant food," she said, quiet and fierce. "I cannot afford anything. So unless you are planning to throw me at the kitchen door as entertainment, this is pointless." Kellan glanced at her, those strange light eyes unreadable. "Didn't ask if you could pay. Asked if you were hungry." "I don't accept charity," Tessa said. "You just gave charity. That's different. How? They were children." "And you're a woman alone who just gave away her last food," Kellan said, pulling open the restaurant door and steering her inside before she could mount a proper argument. The smell of cooking meat hit her like a physical force, and her stomach cramped so viciously she actually gasped. His hand tightened on her elbow, keeping her upright. "2 plates of whatever's hot," he called to the woman behind the counter. "And coffee. Lots of coffee." The restaurant keeper, a broad-shouldered woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes, looked from Kellan to Tessa and back again. Something unspoken passed between them, and then she nodded. "Sit her down before she falls down, Kellan Prescott. You bring in another half-dead stray, I'm going to start charging you extra." "Another?" Tessa echoed faintly as Kellan deposited her into a chair. "My cousin," the restaurant woman said, already moving toward the kitchen, "has a habit of collecting things. Injured horses, starving dogs, apparently half-conscious women. I'm Margaret, and you look like you haven't eaten in a week." 4 days, Tessa admitted, too tired to lie. "I had some dried beans 4 days ago." Margaret's expression went soft and hard at the same time, the way women's faces did when they recognized suffering they understood too well. "Christ in heaven. Kellan, you stay right there with her. I'm bringing the food out myself." Kellan sat across from Tessa, removing his hat and setting it on the empty chair beside him. His hair was dark, sun-streaked at the ends, a bit too long and curling at his collar. He had the look of someone who worked with his hands, all lean muscle and casual strength, probably a ranch hand or a drover. There was dust on his clothes and his skin, but it was clean dust, work dust, not the grimy desperation dust that clung to Tessa like a second skin. "Why?" Tessa asked. "Why what? Why help me? You don't know me, I could be anyone, I could be trouble." Kellan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Could be. But I saw what you did back there, giving your food away to people who needed it worse than you did. That tells me what kind of person you are. Foolish." Tessa suggested bitterly. "Kind," he corrected. "Kind is rare enough that I figure it's worth a meal." Margaret returned before Tessa could formulate a response, setting down 2 plates piled high with steak, beans, and fried potatoes. The coffee came next, black and strong enough to strip paint. Tessa stared at the food, her throat closing up with something that wasn't hunger. "Eat slow," Margaret warned. "Your stomach's probably shrunk down to nothing. You bolt that food and you will lose it right back up, and that's a waste of good beef." Tessa picked up her fork with a hand that shook, and she hated that tremor, hated the weakness it revealed. But the first bite of steak melted on her tongue like benediction, and she had to close her eyes against the sudden burning behind her lids. She chewed slowly, carefully, the way Margaret instructed, and swallowed past the knot in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. Kellan was already eating, methodical and efficient. "Tell me how you ended up like this," he said between bites. "If you want to." Tessa took another careful bite, letting the food settle. The restaurant was mostly empty, just 2 miners at a corner table and an older gentleman reading a newspaper by the window. She should get up and leave, preserve her pride if nothing else. But her legs still felt like water, and the food on her plate represented life itself. "I came here 6 months ago," she said finally, "with my husband, Robert." "Where is he now?" Kellan asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Dead," Tessa said flatly. Mining accident in April. They said the tunnel supports were rotten, that the whole section came down on 12 men at once. They paid me $17 for his life and gave me 3 days to vacate the company housing. Kellan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down deliberately. They gave you 3 days. The company needed the house for new workers, Tessa said, taking another slow bite because if she stopped eating she might start crying, and she had not cried once since they brought Robert's body out of that mine. I found a room in a boarding house, but the money ran out 2 weeks ago. The landlady was kind enough to let me stay an extra week, but eventually. She shrugged. I looked for work, but there's nothing for respectable women in Jerome Junction unless you can cook or sew well enough to charge for it, and I am adequate at both but not exceptional. And the other kind of work. She met his eyes. I wasn't quite desperate enough for that yet. You won't have to be, Kellan said. Tessa laughed, a brittle sound. You cannot know that, Mr. Prescott. You have bought me 1 meal, which I appreciate more than I can express, but unless you plan to feed me indefinitely, tomorrow will bring the same problems as today. Actually, Margaret said, appearing at the table with a coffee pot to refill their cups, I might have a solution to that. Tessa looked up at the older woman, afraid to hope. My daughter was helping me in the kitchen, Margaret continued, but she just got married last week, moved out to her husband's ranch 20 miles north. I've been run ragged trying to do everything myself. You know your way around a kitchen. Yes, Tessa said immediately. I can cook, clean, serve tables, wash dishes, anything you need. Room comes with it, Margaret said. Little space above the restaurant, nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a stove. Meals included as part of your pay plus $2 a week in actual money. Tessa set down her fork carefully, not trusting her hands. Are you serious? Margaret doesn't joke about business, Kellan said, and there was approval in his voice. I'm serious, Margaret confirmed. Lord knows I need the help. You can start tomorrow if you're feeling strong enough or the day after if you need rest. Tomorrow, Tessa said firmly. I can start tomorrow. I will start tomorrow. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said, but she was smiling. You haven't seen how much work it is keeping this place running. We open at 5 in the morning. I will be ready at 4, Tessa promised. Margaret patted her shoulder and moved off to tend to the other customers. Tessa looked across the table at Kellan, who had resumed eating as if he orchestrated miracles over lunch every day. Did you plan that? She asked. I might have mentioned to Margaret this morning that she looked tired, Kellan admitted, and she might have mentioned needing help. And when I saw you give away that bread, he shrugged. Seemed like fate was doing the math for us. You are an unusual man, Kellan Prescott. I just pay attention, he said. Finish your food. You need to eat more than that to get your strength back. Tessa obeyed, taking small, careful bites, letting her stomach adjust. The coffee was bitter and perfect, and she felt strength seeping back into her limbs with each swallow. Across from her, Kellan ate in comfortable silence, not pushing conversation, just present in a way that felt steady and safe. When she finally pushed her plate away, more than half the food gone, she felt almost human again. I don't know how to repay you, she said. Don't need repayment, Kellan said. But if you feel obligated, you can let me buy you dinner again sometime. When you are the one choosing to eat with me instead of being too weak to argue. Tessa blinked. Are you asking to court me, Mr. Prescott? I'm asking to have dinner with a woman who gives away her last meal to hungry children, Kellan said. If that eventually becomes courting, well, I wouldn't object. Heat rose in Tessa's cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. I am recently widowed. I know. It would be inappropriate, probably. People would talk. They'll talk anyway, Kellan said. It's a small town. Tessa wanted to say no, wanted to protect herself from more potential loss, more heartache. But looking at this man with his creek water eyes and his gentle hands and his habit of collecting strays, she found the word wouldn't come. "One dinner," she said finally. "When I am on my feet again and can meet you as an equal rather than a charity case." "Deal," Kellan said, and his smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and impossible to look away from. Tessa stood, testing her legs, finding them solid enough. "I should go find my things. What I have left of them, anyway." "Where are they?" "Behind the livery stable," Tessa admitted. "In a canvas bag." Kellan stood too, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll walk with you. Jerome Junction isn't exactly safe for women alone." Tessa wanted to argue that she had been managing alone for weeks now, but truthfully, having someone beside her as she walked through the dusty streets felt like relief she hadn't known she needed. Kellan kept pace with her, not hovering but present, nodding to people they passed with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged here. "How long have you been in Jerome Junction?" Tessa asked as they navigated around a wagon unloading supplies. 3 years, Kellan said. "Came up from Texas driving cattle. Meant to move on, but the work was good and the pay was decent. I run cattle for the Murphy Ranch about 5 miles out of town. They run beef up to feed the miners and the townsfolk." "So you are a cowboy," Tessa said. "Some days," Kellan agreed. "Other days I'm a fence mender, a horse breaker, a well digger, and occasionally a man who has to convince cows that they want to go downhill instead of uphill. Ranch work is whatever needs doing on that particular day." They reached the livery stable, and Tessa felt her face burn with shame as she led him around back to where she had stashed her pitiful belongings. The canvas bag held 2 dresses, both worn thin, some undergarments, a hairbrush missing half its bristles, and a daguerreotype of her and Robert on their wedding day, looking solemn and hopeful in their borrowed finery. Kellan picked up the bag without comment, slinging it over his shoulder. "That is everything I own in the world," Tessa said, trying to keep her voice light and failing. "Then I'd say you are traveling light," Kellan said. "Makes it easier to move forward when you are not carrying too much past with you." They walked back to the restaurant, and Margaret showed Tessa up the narrow stairs to the room above. It was small, as promised, with a single bed, a small stove, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the main street. After weeks of sleeping on the ground or in corners where no one would notice her, it looked like a palace. "You settle in," Margaret said. "There's water in the pitcher and I will bring up some linens for the bed. Tomorrow we'll get you started properly, but for now, rest. You look like you might blow away in a strong wind." After Margaret left, Tessa sat on the bed, testing the mattress. It was thin but clean, stuffed with straw that rustled under her weight. She looked around her new home, this tiny space that represented safety and possibility, and let herself feel it. Relief. Hope. Terror that it might all disappear like morning fog. A knock at the door interrupted her spiral. She opened it to find Kellan standing there, hat in hand. "Almost forgot," he said, and held out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "From Margaret. She said you would need your strength for tomorrow." Tessa took the bundle, feeling the warmth of fresh bread through the cloth. "Thank you for everything today. You saved my life." "You saved your own life by being the kind of person worth saving," Kellan said. "I just made it easier. Get some rest, Tessa Whitmore. I'll see you soon." He turned to leave, and Tessa found herself speaking before she thought better of it. "Kellan," he looked back, 1 foot on the top stair. "Why did you really help me?" she asked. "The truth." Kellan was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "My mother," he said finally. "After my father died, she was alone with 3 children and no money. We would have starved if people hadn't helped. Strangers who didn't owe us anything but gave anyway. I told myself if I ever had the chance to be that person for someone else, I would. Today I had that chance. Tessa's throat tightened. Did your mother survive? She did, Kellan said. She runs a boarding house in Texas now, makes a good living from it. Sends me letters telling me about all her guests and their various dramas. She would like you, I think. You have the same stubborn spine she does. After he left, Tessa sat on her bed and ate the bread Margaret had sent, taking small, careful bites, and let herself cry for the first time since Robert died. But they weren't just tears of grief anymore. There was gratitude mixed in, and relief, and something that might have been hope. The next morning, Tessa was awake at 4 as promised, washed and dressed in her better of 2 dresses. She found Margaret already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the big iron stove. "You didn't have to be this early," Margaret said, but she looked pleased. "I wanted to," Tessa said simply. "Where do we start?" Margaret put her to work immediately, and Tessa discovered that running a restaurant kitchen was like conducting a small war. There were eggs to crack, bacon to fry, biscuits to bake, coffee to brew strong enough to wake the dead. The miners came in shifts, hungry and dirty and loud, shouting orders and complaining good-naturedly about everything. Tessa moved between tables with plates balanced on both arms, learning names and preferences, dodging wandering hands with practiced ease. By noon she was exhausted but felt more alive than she had in months. This was honest work, hard work, the kind that left you too tired to think at the end of the day. It was exactly what she needed. Kellan came in for lunch, taking a seat at the counter. Tessa felt her heart do something complicated when she saw him, some combination of nerves and pleasure she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "How's the first day treating you?" he asked when she brought him coffee. "Like I'm rediscovering muscles I forgot I had," Tessa admitted. "But good." "It's good. You look better," Kellan said. "Got some color back." "That's probably just exertion and heat," Tessa said, but she was pleased he had noticed. "Margaret is feeding me every few hours whether I want it or not. She says I need fattening up." "She's not wrong," Kellan said. "What's good today?" "The beef stew is excellent and the cornbread is fresh." "I'll take both," Kellan said. "And Tessa, I'm glad you are here, glad you are all right." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight. "Me too," she said quietly, and went to get his food. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Tessa worked hard, sunrise to sunset, learning the peculiar dance of restaurant service. Margaret was a demanding but fair teacher, quick to correct but also quick to praise. The room above the restaurant became home in a way Tessa hadn't expected, a safe haven she could retreat to when the weight of everything threatened to crush her. And Kellan came by almost every day, sometimes for meals, sometimes just passing through town and stopping to say hello. He never pushed, never demanded her time or attention, just showed up like clockwork, steady and reliable as the mountains that surrounded Jerome Junction. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the town gossip, the quirks of various customers. But gradually the conversations deepened. She learned that Kellan was 26, just a year older than her own 25 years, that he had grown up in West Texas in poverty that made her current situation look comfortable, that he had taught himself to read using an old Bible and whatever newspapers he could find, that he was saving money to buy his own piece of land someday, somewhere with water and grass and room to build something lasting. "Why Arizona?" Tessa asked one afternoon when business was slow and she could sit at the counter with her own cup of coffee. "If you want land, there are easier places." "Because it's hard," Kellan said simply. "The land here demands respect. It will kill you if you are careless. But if you can make something work in Arizona, it will last. Hard places build things that don't break easy." "Like people," Tessa suggested. "Especially people," Kellan agreed, and his eyes found hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. 2 months after that first meeting, Kellan asked her formally to dinner. Not at Margaret's restaurant, but at the hotel dining room, where white tablecloths and actual silverware made it a proper occasion. Tessa almost said no. It felt too soon, too wrong somehow to be sitting across from another man enjoying a meal when Robert had been dead less than 6 months. But Margaret, who had become part mother, part friend, took one look at Tessa's face and made the decision for her. "That man has been courting you so patient and proper it would make saints weep," Margaret said, helping Tessa fix her hair. "Robert was a good man, and mourning him is right and natural, but he wouldn't want you to stop living. And Kellan Prescott is the kind of man who comes along maybe once in a lifetime if you are lucky." So Tessa wore her mended dress, the one Margaret had helped her let out now that regular meals had put flesh back on her bones, and met Kellan at the hotel. He stood when she entered, and the look on his face made her glad she had come. Like she was something precious and unexpected, a gift he hadn't known he was hoping for. "You look beautiful," he said. "You look nervous," Tessa countered because he did, shifting his weight and fiddling with his collar. "Terrified," Kellan admitted. "I keep thinking you are going to realize you can do better and walk right back out that door. Better than a man who saved my life and asked nothing in return," Tessa said. "I don't think better exists." They sat, and the dinner was surprisingly good, roasted chicken with vegetables and fresh bread. They talked easily, the conversation flowing like water, and Tessa realized she was laughing, actually laughing, for the first time since Robert died. "Tell me about him," Kellan said later when the dishes were cleared and they were lingering over coffee. "Your husband, if you want to." Most men would have avoided the subject, pretended the past didn't exist. The fact that Kellan asked, that he made space for her grief, made Tessa's chest ache in a different way. "He was kind," she said carefully. "Not exciting or passionate, but steady, safe. We grew up in the same town in Missouri, and when he asked me to marry him, it seemed like the sensible thing to do. He promised me adventure out west, and I was young enough to believe adventure was the same as happiness." "Was it?" Kellan asked. "No," Tessa said honestly. "It was hard and lonely and frightening. But Robert tried. He worked himself to death in those mines trying to give me a better life. I can't regret marrying him, even if I didn't love him the way poets write about. He deserved better than dying in the dark under a mountain of rock." Kellan reached across the table and took her hand, and the touch sent sparks up her arm. "You deserved better than being left alone with $17 and 3 days' notice." "Maybe we both deserved better," Tessa said, "but we get what we get, and we have to make something of it." "Is that what I am?" Kellan asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Making something of what you got." Tessa looked at their joined hands, at the calluses on his fingers that matched the new ones forming on hers from hard work. "You are what I didn't know I needed," she said. "Does that scare you?" "Everything about you scares me," Kellan said. "The way you make me feel scares me, but I spent 3 years being careful and safe, and I don't want to be careful with you. I want to be reckless. I want to court you properly and see where this goes." "I'm still in mourning," Tessa warned. "I know, people will talk. Let them." "I might break your heart," Tessa said. "I'll risk it," Kellan said. "Question is, will you?" Tessa thought about safety and propriety and all the reasons she should say no. Then she thought about Kellan catching her when she fell, buying her food when she was starving, showing up every day just to make sure she was all right. She thought about the way he made her laugh, made her feel seen, made her believe she might actually survive this. "Yes," she said. "I will risk it." Kellan's smile could have lit the entire Arizona territory. They courted through summer into fall, and it was nothing like Tessa's first courtship had been. With Robert, everything had been proper and planned, chaperoned visits and stilted conversations. With Kellan, it was stolen moments between her shifts at the restaurant, walks through town in the cooling evening air, conversations that stretched long into the night while they sat on the stairs outside her room and watched the stars wheel overhead. He brought her things. Small things, thoughtful things. A book of poetry he thought she might like. A hair ribbon the same blue as her eyes. A smooth stone from the creek on the Murphy ranch that was shaped like a heart. Each gift felt like a promise, a tiny piece of his heart offered up for her keeping. In October, he took her out to the ranch to meet his boss and see where he worked. The Murphy Ranch sprawled across a valley 20 miles north of Jerome Junction, with actual grass and a creek that ran year-round. Cattle grazed across rolling hills and the house was solid adobe, built to last. "This is beautiful," Tessa breathed, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Wait until you see what I want to show you," Kellan said, and led her on horseback to a piece of land about a mile from the main ranch house. It was maybe 20 acres of creekside bottomland, with cottonwood trees and good grass, and a view that made Tessa's heart ache with its fierce beauty. "This," Kellan said, dismounting and helping her down, "is what I've been saving for. Murphy is selling it to me on contract. 5 years of payments and it will be mine, ours if you want it to be." Tessa turned to look at him, her heart hammering. "Kellan, I know it's too soon," he said quickly. "I know you need more time, but I wanted you to see it, to know what I'm working toward. I want to build something here, Tessa. A house, a life, a future, and I want to build it with you." "I can't give you an answer right now," Tessa said and watched his face fall. "But not because I don't want to, because I do want to so much it terrifies me. I need to be sure, Kellan. Sure that it's you I'm choosing and not just safety. Sure that what I feel is real and not just gratitude." "That's fair," Kellan said, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. But time has a way of forcing decisions." In November, a man arrived in Jerome Junction looking for work. He was rough and mean-looking, with a scar across his jaw and eyes like dirty ice. Tessa was serving breakfast when he came in, and the way his gaze followed her made her skin crawl. "What's your name, pretty thing?" he asked when she brought his coffee. "That's not your concern," Tessa said coolly. "Everything in this town is my concern if I decide it is," the man said. "I'm looking for work. Know anyone hiring?" "The mines are always looking," Tessa said, setting down his cup. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have other customers." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, tight enough to bruise. "I'm not done talking to you." "Let her go," said a voice from the doorway, low and dangerous. Kellan stood there, still dusty from the trail, and his expression was nothing like the gentle man Tessa knew. This was someone else, someone hard and cold and absolutely certain of violence. The scarred man released Tessa's wrist and stood slowly. "You making this your business, Cowboy?" "I am," Kellan said. "You can leave now or I can remove you. Your choice." "Big words," the scarred man said, but he was already backing toward the door. Something in Kellan's face warned him that this was not a fight he wanted. This town is too small anyway. Full of people who don't know their place. He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Kellan was at Tessa's side immediately, taking her wrist gently and examining the red marks forming there. "Did he hurt you?" Kellan asked, and his voice was still that dangerous stranger's voice. "I'm fine," Tessa said, though her hands were shaking. "Thank you." "I don't like how he looked at you," Kellan said. "I don't like that he touched you. I don't like that he's in this town." "He said he's moving on," Tessa pointed out. "He lied," Kellan said flatly. "Men like that always lie." He was right. The scarred man, whose name turned out to be Jake Winters, took a job at one of the smaller mines and made himself a nuisance. He drank too much, started fights, and made crude comments to every woman he passed. And he seemed to take special interest in Tessa. He came by the restaurant too often, always watching her with those cold eyes. He made remarks just loud enough for her to hear about widows and what they might do for the right price. He followed her when she walked to the general store, staying just far enough back that she couldn't accuse him of anything overt. Kellan started coming by the restaurant 3 times a day, always finding excuses. Margaret said nothing, but Tessa could see the worry in the older woman's face. Jerome Junction was rough, but it had its own code. Winters was breaking that code, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before something bad happened. It came to a head on a cold December night. Tessa was closing up the restaurant late, Margaret having already gone to bed with a headache. She heard the door open and called out without looking, "We're closed for the night. Come back tomorrow." "I'm not here for food," Jake Winters said, and Tessa's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, putting the counter between them. "You need to leave." "I need to leave," Winters repeated mockingly. "That's all you high and mighty types ever say. Leave, go away, I'm too good for you, but you aren't too good, are you? You're just another whore playing at respectability." "Get out," Tessa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Now, or what?" Winters stepped closer. "You going to call for your cowboy? He's not here. Nobody's here but you and me." Tessa's hand found the heavy cast iron skillet on the counter behind her. "I'm warning you." Winters lunged, and Tessa swung the skillet with all her strength. It connected with his shoulder instead of his head, but it was enough to knock him sideways. She ran for the door, but he was faster, grabbing her dress and yanking her back. Then the door slammed open, and Kellan was there. What happened next was fast and brutal. Kellan hit Winters once, twice, 3 times, each blow precise and devastating. Winters tried to fight back, but he was outmatched by Kellan's cold fury. Within 30 seconds, Winters was on the floor, bleeding from his nose and mouth, barely conscious. Kellan stood over him, breathing hard. "If you ever come near her again," he said, each word clear and sharp as broken glass, "I will kill you. That's not a threat. That's a promise." Winters made a gurgling sound that might have been agreement and crawled toward the door. He was gone into the night, leaving a trail of blood on Margaret's clean floor. Tessa stood frozen, the skillet still clutched in her hand. Kellan turned to her, and she saw his knuckles were split and bleeding. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was gentle again, the dangerous stranger gone. "No," Tessa whispered. "How did you know?" "I've been watching the restaurant at night," Kellan admitted. "Sleeping in the livery stable across the street. I didn't trust that bastard." "You've been sleeping in a stable," Tessa said. "Kellan." "I couldn't risk something happening to you," he said simply. "I couldn't stand the thought of you being hurt." Tessa set down the skillet carefully and crossed to him, taking his damaged hands in hers. "You could have been hurt. Worth it," Kellan said. "You're worth it." Tessa looked up at him. This man who had saved her twice now, who watched over her even when she didn't know it, who fought for her without being asked. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that what she felt wasn't gratitude or convenience or fear of being alone. "I love you," she said, and watched his eyes go wide. "I know it's too soon and people will talk and Robert's only been gone 8 months, but I don't care. I love you, Kellan Prescott, and I want that future you showed me. I want the land and the house and the life, and I want all of it with you." Kellan stared at her for a heartbeat too, and then he was kissing her, his split knuckles forgotten, pulling her close like she might disappear if he let go. Tessa kissed him back, pouring all her fear and relief and love into it, tasting copper from his bleeding lip and not caring. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kellan rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Tomorrow if you will have me." "Tomorrow is too soon," Tessa said and felt him stiffen. "But Christmas. Marry me at Christmas." "Christmas," Kellan agreed and kissed her again. Jake Winters left Jerome Junction that night and was never seen again. People said he took the stage south, heading for Tucson or maybe Mexico. Margaret said good riddance and charged Kellan for the broken chair and the blood on her floor, then gave him the money back as an early wedding present. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Tessa had no family to invite, and Kellan's mother was too far away to make the trip on such short notice. But it didn't matter. Margaret stood as Tessa's witness, and Murphy, Kellan's boss, stood for him. The ceremony was at the small church that served Jerome Junction's faithful, with the minister looking slightly scandalized at the short engagement but willing to perform the ceremony anyway. Tessa wore a dress Margaret helped her make, simple blue calico that brought out her eyes. Kellan wore his best clothes, hair slicked back, looking nervous and happy and absolutely perfect. When he saw her walking toward him down the aisle, his face did something complicated, like joy and awe and humble gratitude all mixed together. "I promise," Kellan said when it was time for vows, his voice thick with emotion, "to love you and provide for you and protect you for as long as I live. I promise to build the life we talked about, to give you a home and a future. I promise to never make you feel alone or afraid again." "I promise," Tessa said, tears streaming down her face, "to stand beside you and work with you and love you through whatever comes. I promise to be your partner and your friend. I promise to build that future with you, whatever it takes." They were married on December 25, 1883, while snow fell softly outside the church windows, rare and beautiful in the Arizona mountains. Their wedding night was spent in the hotel, the same one where they had shared their first dinner, and it was nothing like Tessa's first wedding night with Robert. That had been awkward and perfunctory, duty rather than desire. With Kellan, it was fire and tenderness, passion and laughter, the two of them learning each other's bodies like territories to be explored and cherished. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Kellan traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," Tessa admitted, "and happy. Both at once." "Me too," Kellan said, "but we'll figure it out together." And they did. They moved into a small cabin on the Murphy Ranch while they built their own house on the land Kellan was buying. Tessa kept working at the restaurant through winter, saving every penny, and Kellan worked from dawn until dark on both ranch work and their own place. By spring, they had the frame up. By summer, the walls and roof. By fall, they had a home. It was small, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Built with their own hands from wood Kellan hauled from the mountains and adobe bricks Tessa helped make. They had a well with good water, and Kellan strung irrigation to water a garden plot. Tessa planted vegetables and herbs, learning from trial and error what would grow in Arizona's difficult soil. In November of 1884, almost exactly 2 years after that first day, when she had given away her only food, Tessa realized she was pregnant. She told Kellan over dinner, watching his face carefully. Some men didn't want children, or didn't want them so soon, but Kellan's expression went through a rapid series of changes, surprise to understanding to pure, unfiltered joy. "A baby," he said, like testing out the words. "We're having a baby. Are you pleased?" Tessa asked. "Pleased." Kellan came around the table and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands. "Tessa, I'm so far past pleased I don't have words for it. You've given me everything. A home, a life, a purpose. And now a child. I don't deserve any of this." "Yes, you do," Tessa said fiercely. "You deserve all of it and more. You're a good man, Kellan Prescott." Their son was born in June of 1885, with Margaret assisting and Kellan pacing holes in the floor of their bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tessa was sure she wouldn't survive it. But when she finally heard that first wailing cry, when Margaret placed the baby in her arms, all the pain evaporated like dew in the morning sun. "He's perfect," Kellan whispered, staring at the tiny red-faced creature with wonder. "Tessa, he's perfect." They named him Thomas after Tessa's father, and he had his daddy's eyes and his mother's stubbornness. He was colicky and demanding and absolutely adored by both his parents. Kellan proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle, walking the floor with Thomas at all hours of the night, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice, until the baby finally settled. Life on the ranch was hard but good. They raised cattle, selling beef to the mining towns. Tessa kept a vegetable garden and chickens, and started taking in sewing work when Thomas was old enough to not need her constant attention. Kellan made the final payment on their land in 1887, and they celebrated by expanding the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Their daughter, Ruth, was born in 1888, easier than Thomas had been, as if she couldn't wait to join the world. She had Tessa's dark hair and Kellan's calm disposition, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment he first held her. In 1890, they added another son, Daniel, who was so quiet and observant that Tessa sometimes forgot he was there, until he suddenly appeared at her elbow with some question or discovery. The years rolled past, full of work and laughter and the occasional crisis. Drought years when the creek ran low and they had to haul water from farther upstream. Good years when the cattle brought high prices and they could afford small luxuries. Illnesses weathered, accidents survived, children growing like weeds in good soil. Kellan expanded their herd and bought more land, piece by piece, until they had 200 acres of prime grazing. Tessa became known throughout the territory for her sewing skills, and women traveled from as far as Prescott and Flagstaff to have her make their wedding dresses. Margaret retired in 1895 and moved in with them, a beloved grandmother to the children, still sharp-tongued and quick-witted even as her hair went white. She lived to see Thomas start working the ranch alongside his father, Ruth marry a good man from a neighboring ranch, and Daniel head off to learn engineering in California. She died peacefully in her sleep in 1902, and they buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch where she could keep an eye on them all forever. The years were kind to Kellan and Tessa. Oh, there were hard times. Years when money was tight, when illness struck, when worry kept them up at night. But they faced it all together, the way they had promised on that snowy Christmas day in Jerome Junction. In 1910, on their 27th wedding anniversary, Kellan took Tessa back to Jerome Junction. The town had changed, grown larger and more permanent as the mines continued to produce. The restaurant where they met was gone, replaced by a larger hotel, but the church was still there. They stood outside in the December cold, older now but still holding hands like newlyweds. "You remember?" Kellan asked. "Every moment," Tessa said. "Do you regret any of it?" "Not 1 second," Kellan said. "Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because they made us who we are." "Who we are," Tessa repeated. "And who are we, Kellan Prescott?" He pulled her close, and she fit against him the way she always had, perfect and right. "We're 2 people who found each other when we needed it most, who built something good out of nothing, who loved each other through everything life threw at us." "That's a good story," Tessa said. "It's our story," Kellan corrected, "and it's not over yet," and it wasn't. They had 15 more good years together, watching their children grow and have children of their own. Thomas took over the ranch and expanded it further, eventually owning 500 acres and running 300 head of cattle. Ruth gave them 4 grandchildren who Tessa spoiled mercilessly. Daniel became a successful engineer, working on irrigation projects throughout the Southwest, and sent long letters home describing his work. In 1925, Kellan was thrown from a horse while checking fence line and broke his hip. He recovered, but it left him moving slower, more carefully. Tessa, too, felt her age in stiff joints and tired bones. But they had each other, and they had the home they built, and they had the family they created. On a warm May morning in 1926, Tessa found Kellan sitting on their porch, looking out over the land they had fought for and won. He smiled when he saw her, the same smile that had made her breath catch 43 years ago. "Come sit with me," he said, patting the bench beside him. Tessa sat, fitting under his arm like she was designed for that exact space. They watched the sun rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and impossible blue. "We did good, didn't we?" Kellan said. "We did," Tessa agreed. "We did very good." "I love you," Kellan said, like he said every day, like it was new and true and permanent all at once. "From the moment I saw you give that bread to those children, I loved you." "I know," Tessa said, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I love you too, always have, always will." They sat together in the morning light, 2 people who had built a life from kindness and courage and love. Behind them, their house stood solid and strong, filled with the memory of all the laughter and tears and ordinary miracles that make up a life well lived. Before them, the land stretched out green and endless, a legacy for their children and grandchildren and all the generations yet to come. And in that moment, sitting together as the Arizona sun rose over their own piece of heaven, Tessa Prescott knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear and doubt had been worth it. Because it had led her here, to this man, to this life, to this perfect sunrise that promised another day of loving and being loved. Their story had started with hunger and desperation, with giving away the last scrap of food to those who needed it more. But it had become something so much bigger than that. It had become a testament to the power of kindness, to the strength of partnership, to the enduring magic of 2 people choosing each other every single day. And when Kellan Prescott died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71 in 1928, with Tessa holding his hand and their children gathered around, his last words were, "Thank you for letting me love you." Tessa lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, still sewing and telling stories about the old days. She spoke often of that first day, of being so hungry she could barely stand, of giving away her only food, of the cowboy who saw it and changed her entire life. She died in her own bed in the house they built together, with her children and grandchildren around her, and her last thought was of Kellan waiting for her, probably with that crooked smile and those creek water eyes, ready to start the next adventure together. They buried her next to him on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read, "Kellan and Tessa Prescott. They built something lasting." And it was. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, and the story of how it all began became family legend. The story of a starving woman who gave away her last meal, and the cowboy who saw it and fell in love. The story of 2 people who built a life on kindness and courage and love that lasted beyond their own lives, rippling out through time in the family they created and the legacy they left behind. It was a good story, a true story, a love story that began with hunger and ended with abundance, that started with nothing and built everything. The kind of story that reminds us that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the entire course of a life, and that love, real love, is worth fighting for, building toward and cherishing every single day in the end. That's all any of us can hope for. To love and be loved. To build something that lasts. To leave the world a little better than we found it. Kellan and Tessa Prescott did all that and more, and their story lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the enduring power of human connection, and the miracles that happen when two hearts recognize each other across the crowded chaos of life, and decide, against all odds, to hold on tight and never let go.